On the morning of August 4th, 1944, in the heart of Nazi-occupied Amsterdam, several plainclothes members of the German security service climbed the stairs of a warehouse building at Prinsengracht 263. They moved with purpose. They knew exactly where they were going. Behind a bookcase on the third floor, they found what they were looking for. 8 Jewish people who had been hiding in a secret annex for over 2 years. Among them was a 15-year-old girl named Anne Frank, who had been documenting her life in hiding in a diary that would later become one of the most powerful testimonies of the Holocaust. Within weeks, all 8 would be deported to concentration camps. Only one would survive. The question that has haunted historians, investigators, and millions of people around the world for the past 80 years is simple but devastating. Who betrayed Anne Frank? In January 2022, a team of investigators led by a retired FBI agent announced they had finally solved the mystery. Their conclusion shocked the world, but within months, their theory was torn apart by leading Holocaust scholars. The book presenting their findings was pulled from Dutch bookstores and condemned as historically flawed. So what really happened? Who, if anyone, betrayed the Frank family? And can we ever truly know? Welcome to one of history's most painful and persistent mysteries. To understand this mystery, we need to understand Anne Frank's story. Anne was born on June 12, 1929, in Frankfurt, Germany. And when Hitler rose to power in 1933, her father Otto Frank, a Jewish businessman, saw the writing on the wall. In 1934, he moved his family to Amsterdam, hoping the Netherlands would remain neutral as it had in World War I. For a few years, life was good. Otto established a successful business selling pectin, a substance used in jam making. His company, Opekta, had offices and a warehouse at Prinsengracht 263, a building along one of Amsterdam's famous canals. But in May 1940, Nazi Germany invaded the Netherlands. The occupation was swift and brutal. Anti-Jewish laws were implemented rapidly. Jews were required to wear yellow stars. They were banned from parks, theaters, and public transportation. Their businesses were confiscated. By 1942, the deportations began. Jews were being rounded up and sent to transit camps, then to places whose names would become synonymous with horror: Auschwitz, Sobibor, Bergen-Belsen. On July 5, 1942, Anne's 16-year-old sister Margot received a call-up notice for a work camp in Germany. The family knew what this really meant. The next day, July 6th, the entire Frank family went into hiding in the secret annex at Prinsengracht 2063. They were soon joined by 4 others: Herman van Pels, his wife Auguste, their son Peter, and a dentist named Fritz Pfeffer. 8 people living in cramped rooms behind a bookcase, completely dependent on a small group of brave helpers who brought them food, news, and hope. For 2 years and 1 month, they lived this way. During the day, they had to remain absolutely silent so warehouse workers below wouldn't hear them. At night, Anne wrote in her diary, documenting her thoughts, fears, dreams, and the complicated relationships within the annex. Then, on August 4th, 1944, it all ended. SS officer Karl Silberbauer led the raid. Years later, he would claim he received a phone call that morning tipping him off to Jews hiding at Prinsengracht 263. The people in the annex were arrested, along with 2 of their helpers, Johannes Kleiman and Victor Kugler. Of the 8 people arrested, only Otto Frank survived. Anne and Margot both died of typhus in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in February or March 1945, just weeks before the camp was liberated. After the war, Otto returned to Amsterdam broken but determined. He wanted answers. Who had betrayed his family? How had the Nazis known? The first and most obvious suspect was Willem van Maaren, a warehouse worker who had been employed at Prinsengracht 263 starting in March 1943. The helpers who knew about the secret annex never trusted Van Maaren. They suspected he was trying to figure out what was happening in the building. Anne herself wrote about him in her diary with deep suspicion. On September 16th, 1943, she wrote that Van Maaren was getting suspicious about the annex and that he's not one who can be put off with a flimsy excuse. Van Maaren had reportedly set small traps around the warehouse, placing pencils in specific positions to see if they'd been moved, suggesting someone was in the building at night. He asked probing questions. He was, by all accounts, unreliable and excessively curious. In 1947, Otto Frank and the helpers filed a formal complaint against Van Maaren with Dutch police. An investigation followed, but it yielded no concrete evidence. Van Maaren insisted on his innocence. He admitted he knew something strange was happening in the building, but claimed he never knew about the secret annex or the people hiding there. A second investigation occurred in 1963 after Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal tracked down SS officer Karl Silberbauer in Vienna. Silberbauer gave conflicting accounts about who had called in the tip, at one point mentioning Van Maaren's name, but his statements were inconsistent and unreliable. Despite 2 investigations, Van Maaren was never charged. He maintained his innocence until his death. Today, most historians doubt he was the betrayer. Other suspects emerged over the decades. In 1998, biographer Melissa Miller suggested Lena Hartog, a cleaning woman whose husband worked in the warehouse. Hartog might have suspected the hiding place and reported it to protect herself and her family, but there was no evidence to support this theory. In 2002, author Carol Ann Lee pointed to Tani Ehlers, a Dutch Nazi sympathizer who had a business relationship with Otto Frank before the war. Lee claimed that Ehlers had blackmailed Otto, extracting money from him after Otto made negative comments about Germany's war prospects. Ehlers' own son supported this theory, believing his father capable of such betrayal, but a subsequent Dutch investigation found no hard evidence connecting Ehlers to the betrayal. In 2015, Dutch journalist Jeroen de Bruijn suggested Nelly Voskjel, the younger sister of one of the helpers, Bep Voskwijl. Nelly was known to be a Nazi collaborator who had run away to Austria with a German officer. She had been critical of her sister and father for helping Jews. In one argument, she reportedly shouted, "Go to your Jews!" Silberbauer had mentioned the informant had the voice of a young woman. Could it have been Nelly? Again, no definitive proof emerged. Perhaps the most tragic suspect was Ans van Dijk, a Jewish woman who, after being arrested by the Nazis, was given a terrible choice: deportation to a death camp or helping the Gestapo track down other Jews. She chose survival and became a V-Frau, a trusted person who betrayed fellow Jews while pretending to help them hide. Van Dijk was responsible for the arrest of at least 145 Jews, possibly as many as 700. In 2018, author Gerard Kramer claimed Van Dijk had betrayed the Franks. A Dutch resistance fighter named Gerard Kramer claimed he had witnessed Van Dijk visiting the SD building in August 1944 and overheard her discussing Prinsengracht. But the Anne Frank house investigated and couldn't confirm this theory. Van Dijk was executed by firing squad in 1948 for her crimes, but whether the Frank family was among her victims remains unproven. So many suspects, so much circumstantial evidence, but no definitive answer, until 2022. On January 17th, 2022, the world's media erupted with a sensational headline. The mystery of who betrayed Anne Frank had finally been solved. A 6-year cold case investigation led by Vince Pankoke, a retired FBI agent, concluded with 85% certainty that the Frank family had been betrayed by Arnold van den Bergh, a Jewish notary and prominent businessman in Amsterdam. The accusation was explosive for one simple reason. If true, it meant Anne Frank had been betrayed, not by a Nazi collaborator, not by a warehouse worker, not by a greedy informant, but by a fellow Jew trying to save his own family. The investigation was impressive in scope. The team included historians, archivists, psychologists, data analysts, and war crimes investigators. They used artificial intelligence to analyze millions of pages of documents. They created a massive database of information about everyone connected to the case. They investigated over 30 suspects across 20 different scenarios. Their conclusion centered on a single piece of evidence, an anonymous note. Shortly after the war ended and Otto Frank returned to Amsterdam in 1945, he received an anonymous note. The note stated that Arnold van den Bergh, a Jewish notary who lived near Vondelpark, had given a list of hiding place addresses to the Nazi Jewish Emigration Office, and that the Frank family's address was on that list. Otto had made a typed copy of this note, which was discovered decades later in the files of a Dutch detective who had investigated the case in 1963. The original note has never been found, according to the cold case team's theory. Here's what happened. Arnold van den Bergh was a member of the Jewish Council, a Nazi-created organization that was supposed to represent the Jewish community, but was actually used by the Nazis to implement their policies. Council members were initially given certain protections and exemptions from deportation in exchange for their cooperation. By late 1943, the Jewish Council was dissolved, and most members were sent to concentration camps. But Van den Bergh and his immediate family were not. Investigators discovered that Van den Bergh remained living openly in Amsterdam throughout 1944, which should have been impossible for a Jew without some kind of protection or leverage. The team theorized that Van den Bergh, desperate to protect his family, traded information with the Nazis. As a Jewish council member, he allegedly had access to lists of addresses where Jews were hiding. He gave these addresses to the SD, and the Frank family's address at Prinsengracht 263 was among them. The team claimed Van den Bergh wouldn't have known who was hiding at these addresses. They were just addresses on a list. His goal wasn't to betray Anne Frank specifically, just to provide valuable intelligence to keep his own family safe. The investigation was featured on CBS's 60 Minutes. A book was published, The Betrayal of Anne Frank, A Cold Case Investigation, by Canadian author Rosemary Sullivan. The story went viral around the world, but there was a problem, actually several problems. Within days of the announcement, criticism began pouring in from Holocaust historians and researchers, particularly in the Netherlands. The Anne Frank House, the museum and research center dedicated to Anne Frank's legacy, issued a statement on January 17, 2022, the same day the findings were announced. They called the investigation impressive, but noted that key pieces of the puzzle are still missing and no conclusive evidence has been found. Their concerns were significant. First, the anonymous note. Where was the original? Who wrote it and why? When exactly did Otto Frank receive it? The only evidence was a typed copy, and its authenticity and provenance couldn't be verified. Second, what was Arnold van den Bergh's whereabouts in the crucial period of 1944? The last documented mention of him during the war was in February 1944, 6 months before the Frank family was arrested. Where was he? What was he doing? Third, and most importantly, did lists of Jewish hiding places even exist? And did the Jewish Council have them? Multiple prominent historians, including Bart van der Boom, Lorian Vastenhout, and Johannes Houwink Tenkate, stated there was no historical evidence that the Jewish Council possessed such lists. Think about it logically. Why would anyone maintain a written list of secret hiding places? The entire point of going into hiding was secrecy. Creating lists would be suicidal. Moreover, if Van den Bergh had given the SD an entire list of Jewish hiding places in August 1944, there should have been a spike in raids and arrests at that time. No such spike occurred. In March 2022, just 2 months after the book's publication, a team of 5 Dutch historians published a devastating 80-page counter-investigation titled The Betrayal of Anne Frank, a Refutation. Their conclusion was unambiguous. Arnold van den Bergh cannot be accused of betraying Anne Frank based on the available evidence. The researchers argued that the cold case team had made numerous assumptions and then built their entire theory on those assumptions. They accused the investigation of lacking proper historical understanding and context. The historians wrote something particularly powerful. The debate about the Holocaust and the position of Jews during World War II must be approached with respect for the historical context and with nuance, rather than from an overly complacent modern perspective. For only then can we do justice to the past and also do justice to the people of the past, including the notary Arnold van den Bergh. Van den Bergh's granddaughter, Miriam de Gorter, spoke out publicly. She stated that her grandfather and his family were all in hiding with the Dutch resistance by 1944 in separate safe houses. Van den Bergh had no motive to betray anyone because he was already protected. She was devastated that her grandfather's name had been publicly branded as a traitor on such flimsy evidence. Family friend Paul Thielen confirmed that he was the grandchild of the person who had hidden Van den Bergh's youngest daughter, Anne-Marie, from 1943 to 1945. Van den Bergh was hiding in the town of Laren, far from Amsterdam. It made no sense for him to travel to Nazi headquarters to inform on Jews. The backlash intensified. In March 2022, the Dutch publisher Ambo Anthos announced it would cease publication and remove the book from bookstores. They issued an apology, admitting they should have been more critical before publishing. The German publisher delayed its release and announced plans for a revised edition. Canadian author Rosemary Sullivan defended her work, stating she never doubted the integrity of the investigation, but the damage was done. The theory that had promised to finally solve the mystery had instead created a new controversy and potentially destroyed an innocent man's reputation. Arnold van den Bergh had died in 1950. He had no ability to defend himself. There's another possibility that many historians now consider the most plausible, that there was no betrayal at all. In 2016, 6 years before the cold case team's announcement, the Anne Frank house published research by historian Gertjan Broek that suggested something remarkable. The raid on August 4, 1944, might not have been about finding Jews at all. Brock noted several unusual aspects of the arrest. The raid lasted over 2 hours, which was much longer than typical raids to arrest Jews in hiding. The SD officers who conducted the raid were not specialists in hunting Jews. Karl Silberbauer's unit actually focused on economic crimes, particularly fraud involving ration coupons. By 1944, Amsterdam was experiencing severe shortages. The Nazi blockade had created near-famine conditions. Ration coupons were precious and a black market thrived. Otto Frank's company at Prinsengracht 263 was involved in illegal activities, including fraud with ration coupons. In March 1944, 4 months before the raid, 2 representatives of Otto Frank's company had been arrested for illegal trading in ration coupons. This had brought the building to the attention of the SD's Economic Investigation Unit. Broek's theory suggested that on August 4, 1944, the SD came to Prinsengracht 263 to investigate economic crimes, not to find Jews. During their thorough search of the building for evidence of black market activity, they simply stumbled upon the Secret Annex by accident. This would explain why the raid took so long. It would explain why Silberbauer, an economic crimes investigator, led the raid. It would explain why no mass wave of arrests followed, as would be expected if the SD had obtained a list of hiding places. It's a theory that removes the agonizing question of betrayal and replaces it with the cold randomness of tragic coincidence. Sometimes history isn't about villains making calculated choices. Sometimes it's just about terrible luck. The Anne Frank house notes on its website, clearly, the last word about that fateful summer day in 1944 has not yet been said. One of the most intriguing aspects of this entire mystery is Otto Frank's own behavior after the war. Otto lived until 1980. For 35 years after his family's murder, he was the guardian of Anne's legacy. He published her diary, established the Anne Frank House Museum, and dedicated his life to Holocaust education. But when it came to the question of who betrayed his family, Otto was strangely circumspect. He suspected Willem van Maaren and filed a complaint against him. But when the investigations yielded no evidence, he let it drop. He never publicly accused anyone else. He never campaigned for justice against his betrayer. The cold case team theorized that Otto knew it was Arnold van den Bergh who had betrayed him because of the anonymous note. But they suggested Otto kept quiet about it because he didn't want to stir up anti-Semitism by revealing that a Jew had betrayed other Jews. This theory presents Otto as protecting van den Bergh's reputation at the cost of justice for his own family. Some find this noble, others find it implausible. But there's another possibility. Maybe Otto didn't know who betrayed him. Maybe he received conflicting information from multiple sources. Maybe the anonymous note was just one of many accusations he received, none of them proven. Or maybe, as the no betrayal theory suggests, Otto eventually came to believe there was no single betrayer. Maybe he accepted that his family's discovery was a tragic accident resulting from their involvement in black market activities that drew unwanted attention to the building. We'll never know what Otto truly believed because he chose not to tell us. For 80 years, investigators, historians, amateur sleuths, and millions of ordinary people have been obsessed with solving this mystery. Why? Part of it is our human need for answers. We want to believe that events, especially terrible events, happen for clear reasons. We want villains we can blame. We want to understand how tragedy occurs so we can believe we might prevent it in the future. But there's something deeper at work. The question of who betrayed Anne Frank touches on some of the most painful aspects of the Holocaust: collaboration, moral choices under impossible circumstances, and the ways ordinary people became complicit in genocidal horror. If Willem van Maaren betrayed them, it's a story about casual evil, about someone willing to send innocent people to their deaths out of greed or spite or simple indifference. If Arnold van den Bergh betrayed them, it's a story about impossible choices. What would any of us do to save our children? How far would we go? Could we condemn strangers to save our own families? If there was no betrayal, if the discovery was just chance, then it's a story about the randomness of survival during the Holocaust. Why did Otto survive when millions didn't? Why did Anne die just weeks before liberation? There's no satisfying answer to such questions. Perhaps what makes this mystery so enduring is that it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and moral ambiguity in times of extreme evil. As Rosemary Sullivan, the author of the controversial 2022 book, said, "The point wasn't just to find who betrayed Anne Frank. It was to give an impression of what it was like to live under occupation in constant fear. And to ask for moral clarity in such a context is absolutely arrogant." She also said something that resonates. "We went looking for a perpetrator and we found a victim." Whether or not van den Bergh was guilty, he too was a victim of the Nazi system that created impossible choices. So, who betrayed Anne Frank? The honest answer is, we don't know, and we may never know. Despite decades of investigations, millions of pages of documents analyzed, and the passionate efforts of countless researchers, the question remains unanswered. Every suspect has been thoroughly investigated, and every theory has significant flaws or gaps in evidence. Perhaps the most important thing to remember is this: whoever may or may not have betrayed the Frank family, the true villains are clear. The Nazis systematically murdered 6 million Jews, including Anne Frank, her sister, her mother, and over 100,000 Dutch Jews. The Nazis created the occupation, the laws, the deportations, the concentration camps, and the moral hell that forced people into impossible situations where survival might mean betraying others. Anne Frank died of typhus in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp at age 15. Probably in late February or early March 1945. She was buried in a mass grave. British troops liberated the camp just weeks later on April 15, 1945. What survives is her voice. Her diary, which her father published, has been translated into over 70 languages and read by millions. Her words about hope, humanity, and the possibility of goodness even in the darkest times continue to resonate. "In spite of everything," she wrote, "I still believe that people are truly good at heart. The mystery of her betrayal may never be solved, but her legacy is secure. Thank you for watching. If this deep dive into one of history's most persistent mysteries moved you, please subscribe for more historical content. And let me know in the comments, do you think we'll ever definitively solve the mystery of who betrayed Anne Frank? Or are some questions destined to remain unanswered? Until next time, remember the pursuit of truth matters, but so does humility about what we can and cannot know about the past.